asked by a few of my subscribers to review this new series, The Wheel of Time, and I looked into it. I saw Rosamund Pike, I saw lesbian activity, and I saw swords, and I thought, well, I got a little time for this. I do. So The Wheel of Time is based on a book series, and as a disclaimer, I have not read the book series. I have some basic knowledge of the books, but certainly nothing in depth. So I am basing this review off of the show alone. Just something to bear in mind about this review. So yes, let's get into it. So what is The Wheel of Time about? Set in a sprawling epic world where magic exists and only certain women are allowed to access it, The Wheel of Time follows Moiraine, a member of the incredibly powerful all-female organisation called the Aes Sedai, as she arrives in the small town of Two Rivers. There, she embarks on a dangerous world-spanning journey with 5 young men and women, one of whom is prophesied to be the Dragon Reborn, who will either save or destroy humanity. Okay, so I have mixed opinions about this show, but I'll start with the positives. It's safe to say that Rosamund Pike is the best thing about this series, and I think if you're a fan of hers, it's definitely worth watching this for her acting alone. Now, I'm sure most of you came here to hear my thoughts on Moiraine and Siuan, and honestly, I think they're just complete fire together. This is likely due to the energy that both of these actors harness and the connection that they had with each other. But it was just incredible to watch. It was very brief, but amazing. That's what the ladies say about me. Look, it's clearly not going to be some big romance, but nonetheless, the moments that they had together were very potent. And apparently the part where Moiraine tells Siuan to get on her knees was improvised, which, sweet Jesus on a biscuit, I wish that was me. This is probably predictable on my end, but I did find episode 6 to be the most engaging episode so far this season. I had real trouble staying engaged with the previous episodes, but I'll come back to that in a bit. I mean, yes, that is where the lesbian activity happened, but it was also heavily centered around Moiraine, and Pike has such an on-screen presence which really goes in this show's favor. I also just thought episode 6 was one of the better paced episodes and also fairly well directed. Another positive aspect about The Wheel of Time is the diversity it offers, especially in terms of race. Now, I have seen some people complain about the amount of diversity in this show and, suggesting that the diversity is forced and performative and is just there to push some sort of agenda, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, look, if your issue with a show is that seeing a decent percentage of non-white characters as opposed to a majority of white characters makes you defensive or uncomfortable, you might want to unpack why that's making you feel uncomfortable. And whilst I admit the character building in this show needs a lot of work, that has nothing to do with anybody's skin colour. If anything, it's refreshing to watch a fantasy series where black people and people of colour have a presence, since they've actually always existed and have historically been a minority, if not altogether left out of shows and books in this genre. I'm certainly not saying a fantasy series has to be diverse or that the diversity makes it a good show, but it certainly is nice to see something different, and I find that to be a positive thing. So that's the positives. Now moving on to what I really didn't like about the show, which is quite a bit. The show itself, in theory, should have been something I enjoyed, because I am somebody who enjoys the fantasy genre, and I certainly enjoy Rosamund Pike, but I just didn't take to this show at all. I think the biggest letdown about this show is the characters. Outside of Moiraine, almost all of the other characters seem to me to be somewhat dry, and none of them really stood out as their own person. It was difficult for me to connect with or care about almost any of these characters. The production quality is also noticeably lacking, which doesn't help the show's case when it's already lacking in other areas. That said, I don't think the poor production quality is the Wheel of Time's main downfall, because when you think about a show like Xena Warrior Princess, for example, Oh yes, I have to mention Xena in almost all of my videos. But yes, look, Xena didn't always have the most realistic or grittiest of backdrops given the time that it was made, but it didn't matter because the characters and writing were so solid, and that's what hooked you into the show. In fact, I think if you have a solid cast, you will probably have a solid show, and I feel like this is the Wheel of Time's biggest flaw. I think this issue is also exacerbated by the somewhat wooden and clunky dialogue. Perhaps if the actors were given better scripts and the characters had been less two-dimensional, that might have given the actors room to shine and made it a bit easier to connect with them as people, but even still, that's a big maybe. Honestly, I just could not stay engaged with this show outside of episode 6, and if I'm honest, I don't know if I stayed engaged with episode 6 purely because of the lesbianism. And this is a shame because this show clearly has potential and I wanted to like it, but it just doesn't have the right sort of team or support behind it for it to really blossom. Finally, I've heard a lot about the Wheel of Time books and this show supposedly being empowering for women. And as a disclaimer here, if women who have read the books or watched the show did find it empowering in their own way, that is perfectly valid and I don't want to downplay that. But in my own opinion, from what I've read about these books and seen from this show, I think that notion is laughable, since both of these productions can only be a projection of what men think empowerment is, particularly female empowerment. And this in itself is very reductive. You might think the show at least had some damage control considering there were actual women involved, but no. To be honest, I was cringing from these projections in the very first episode. From my perspective, the show seemed less about creating fleshed out, interesting, and humanized female characters, and more about projecting the creators' notions of women and gender politics. And look, I'm sure nobody is reading these books or watching this show for its feminist offerings, but gender politics is clearly a driving theme in these productions, so it's worth mentioning since the way it's approached contributes to my lack of connection with this show. So yes, to sum it up, I feel like the show is a weak cup of tea and Rosamund Pike is a delicious biscuit on the side. That's how I feel. Okay guys, if you've been watching The Wheel of Time, please let me know your own thoughts down in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe for instant disappointment, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.